Final Fantasy VIII is and always has been a very polarizing game, I think, in the sense that people either love Final Fantasy VIII or hate Final Fantasy VIII, and there's not really very much in between, and people are very vehement about it. There are people who are like, it's the worst game ever made, it's atrocious, it's horrible, and then there's people who are like, if you didn't like it, it's because you're really stupid and didn't understand the gameplay systems, and you're an idiot, and you're a dumb, stupid idiot. And I would like to posit that maybe the truth is somewhere in between these two things. This game is a big trip down memory lane for me. 7 is technically the first Final Fantasy game I ever played, but 8 was the first I ever finished. I have a lot of criticisms of this game, honestly, despite the special place in my heart it occupies, and I mean like a lot, and my goal for this video is to stay under an hour, but we'll see how that pans out for me. If you're a Final Fantasy VIII hater, I'm probably not going to be nearly mean enough for your taste, and if you're a Final Fantasy VIII lover, I'm probably not going to be nearly positive enough for your taste. So, laying that groundwork out right now. With that being said, here's a really long video about why I think Final Fantasy VIII is like a 7 out of 10. So, easily the most talked about and controversial, I suppose, element of Final Fantasy VIII is its combat / gameplay system. It's weird. It's weird by Final Fantasy standards, it's weird by RPG standards, it's definitely very unique. They have the junctioning system where you draw spells from enemies and you stack these spells. You have, 10, 15, 50, 100 of them, and then you junction them to your stats. If you have a lot of a really good spell and you junction it to like your strength stat will be like really crazy stupid high. And so it is a very interesting system in that it allows for a lot of ways to play the game, and it allows for a very customizable experience. That said, it's got a steep ass learning curve, I will tell you that right now. I completely understand why people do not like the junctioning system. I was watching that tutorial with like 3 glasses of wine in my system, and I was not having much fun either. In practice, it's fine. It's not the worst gameplay system, but it's not the best either. I managed and have managed with this system, but it's rather time consuming. So the thing that you are junctioning is a guardian force, which this game lovingly abbreviates to GF the entirety of the time, which is just the bit that keeps on giving. The junctioning system itself is, like I said, it has a steep learning curve, and I personally am not a fan of having to do homework for the video games I play just to beat it. And like I said, I played this game a long time ago when I was a kid, and I replayed it for this video. There was a couple times where I was like, wait, what? And I had to go look it up and like check forums and like look at what other people did. And while like there is a certain sense of community in that, I don't always love when like I have to pause the game and get out my phone and make like 4 or 5 Google searches before I know what's going on. Especially because you can get like 3 or 4 or 5 submenus deep in the junctioning system, especially like, there's stuff like, for example, if you want one of the characters, Rinoa, her limit breaks involve her dog getting shot at the enemies and then exploding. I love when the dog explodes. And if you want to teach the dog new moves, you have to go into like the status menu and then to like this other thing, and then you have to hit the left directional arrow pad 2 times, and then you can select what the dog will learn. Functionally, I understand. I don't know where else you would put that, but there is a lot of little things like this where you will just be like deep in menus, and they're just like the same monotonous gray, and it's confusing, and it's just a menu system that is a bit dense, and it takes a while to get used to, and I think it certainly is something that has scared a lot of people off of this game. Is just like, you start and they are slamming you with this just dreary gray tutorial for like 15 minutes. And another thing about the junctioning system is when you switch between parties, because sometimes your party is split up into 2 groups and you'll have to switch back and forth between them during gameplay sections, specifically like story heavy sections. And the sections, especially like the parade during disc 1, which we'll get to later, it's a huge pain because you have to switch back and forth between your 2 parties pretty frequently. And especially at this point in disc 1, you're probably not gonna have enough GFs to like have full junctions on all 6 of your party members all the time. You might only have 4 or 5 GFs at this point in the game, potentially less if you missed a couple of them. So you do have to swap junctions like every single time your party switches. And there is a junction swapping mechanic that'll just one-to-one move everything over between characters, but if you want specific abilities on a specific character or you want to actually personalize junctioning at all, it can really disrupt the flow of the gameplay and of the story, because you'll spend like several minutes in sub-menu hell moving everything around in the middle of what's supposed to be like an urgent, intense situation. Yep. I hate that the game just randomly undoes all of your junctions at various points. Like, sometimes you go into the menu and they're like, oh, oops, there's nothing junction to anyone. And if you go into a battle right now, you won't be able to do anything. And like, there is no like cue that has happened. You just have to like check every now and again to make sure that they haven't like unjunctioned all of your work. Another complaint I have, I suppose, which could arguably be categorized as world design as well as gameplay, is that a lot of times when I set the game down and came back to play like the next day or something, I would completely forget what I was tasked with and wander around for like 20 minutes trying to find the next plot thing, because there isn't really a way to check if you don't remember like one line of dialogue somebody told you. I have no idea what I'm supposed to be doing. There was still like very often no way to check what I was supposed to be doing or where I was supposed to be going. There's also a fair bit of pixel hunting and moving around and standing in just the right place to get the proper action or line of dialogue or whatever you need to progress, and that can be pretty frustrating. What? Bastard of a game. What do you mean? What do you mean? I had to hit it at that exact angle? God. Both the pixel hunting and this like somewhat hands-off approach to letting the player know where they need to go is arguably just a product of its time. Late 90s games are famously known for having very few qualms about letting a player get stuck by way of something arbitrary. The game isn't hard at all if you have a lot of really powerful spells to junction, but it is conversely really, really difficult if you don't. And if you don't keep up your stock of magic diligently, especially around the endgame, the difficulty can spike really high. Which, this sounds obvious, I know, because junctioning is the whole gameplay system, and I'm aware it sounds ridiculous to say the game is hard if you don't engage with its core system, but I think it's worth mentioning because I feel you can technically get away with only half-assing it for a long while in this game. And part of the reason it is possible to get away with junctioning weaker spells for so long is that you do have GF attacks which deal a lot more damage, so you can kind of fall back on that and spam it if you don't have like actually good junctions. Another thing too though is having junction magic means if you want your stats to stay as high as they are, you don't really want to cast most of your spells, because then your stats will go down because you'll have fewer spells junctioned to your stat, which can lead to like relying on regular attacks, limit breaks, or GF attacks over spells, and sometimes you'll only have like one party member casting at all, like support spells, and almost nothing else, which is kind of a weird situation for the game's magic system, especially for a Final Fantasy game, for magic to be something that you're so de-incentivized to use other than very specific spells and very specific instances. Also, the battle assist mode they have in the remaster, because the remaster is what I played for this video, the battle assist mode they have in the remaster is kind of crazy. Like, they just have this default button that's always there that allows you to just go God mode. It's bananas from like a game design balance perspective. Like, it's crazy. It is, however, really useful for me to go back and get additional footage for this video. Like, it's really convenient and therefore I cannot complain too much. But also, if you're not using it to get footage for something like I was, it's a little bit like, why is this here? While most of this game is exploration and turn-based combat, Final Fantasy VIII is also fond of a random-ass minigame with the most insane and evil input lag you've ever experienced in your life. The Paratrooper minigame was especially crazy, plus the one with the dragon. All of them are like that. The train one wasn't so bad, the Paratrooper one was the worst. But every now and again, it'll just be like, surprise! And you have to do something like completely different from regular gameplay. And you know, while I appreciate some variety, some of the input lag on these little mini games is just so crazy. It's so crazy that like, it's just insane. Wow, whoa, the input lag on this is insane. What's with the input lag on the Y? Dude. What? So I'm gonna do a quick lightning round of a few more aspects of the game I have some thoughts on, but I don't really want to go too terribly in depth for the sake of the runtime of this video. The cutscenes. The cutscene game was crazy, like actually baller, and it was a very big deal when this game came out how nice a lot of their cutscenes looked. It's been praised a lot for the advancements in 3D game cutscenes, and its use of motion capture as well as some pretty complicated hair are two very impressive points of that animation. The waltz between Squall and Rinoa was even used as the PS2 tech demo, I believe. And the fact that they were using motion capture was certainly unusual for video games at the time and something of an innovation. I also think the integration they had between cutscenes and gameplay was relatively clever at times. Now that's jail. There was a lot of transferring between exploration and gameplay into cutscene, back into gameplay, back into cutscene, especially during the parade segment. Also, everyone has like really shiny hair in the cutscenes. That's not important. It just stood out to me. Like they have like reflective hair. Like you could maybe use it as a mirror type shiny. And there's one last thing I'm gonna put a pin in with the cutscenes, and that's that I'm of the opinion that the cutscenes often offer stronger and more compelling characterization in their short runtime than the game proper does with pages of dialogue. The visual design of Final Fantasy VIII is also something that I find to be quite strong. Some of the environments are a little goofy looking, I'll be honest, but others are really, really wonderful. The inside of Balam Garden, slightly sci-fi school, cool stuff, very, very interesting layout. The outside, whoa. This game also has a very summer feel about it. The developers said it was a conscious effort to make 8 brighter and lighter than 7, in visual design especially. A lot of the scenes with a gentle breeze in the ocean and blues and greens and yellows. It's a distinctly optimistic sci-fi setting compared to 7's dystopia. This is technically audio design, but they actually play like bird sounds a lot during quieter scenes and seagull cries when you're near the ocean, which really adds to this feeling. There's a real Y2K futurism undercurrent to the design too, especially in Disc 3 and S-Star. It gets very, there's a lot of blues and greens, there's a lot of very sleek, plasticky looking textures. It's very, what's that one 3D movie with the kid and the robot family? My brain said Jetsons, but that's not it. It's something else. It's got the time-traveling kid in the future with his family, and he's like, I hate the future, I want to go back, whatever. This isn't important, but now I'm thinking about it, and it's kind of similar. And lastly, we have the soundtrack. It's phenomenal, and there's no point mincing words about it. The opera/church choir-esque chanting and singing, and the haunting music box, evil fairy tale strings that kick in when the sorceress is around, incredible. I think during the parade in Ultimisia's castle at the end, there are some especially strong tracks. My heater just turned on, you can hear that. That's great. There are randomly some scenes with no music at all though. Because the game has no voice acting, if there's no ambient seagulls or cicadas or music, some scenes are quite literally dead silent, which, when used intentionally, can be great, but it doesn't always feel like that was the case. What? Where are you going? What? Oh no. What is this scene? Completely silent. Oh no, she's gone off screen. Why did she just walk off? There was also the lead single ballad situation off the soundtrack Eyes on Me by Faye Wong. It was a mega hit in Japan and one of the most successful songs from a video game ever. I love me some Faye Wong, her stuff is great. It's just a nice song. It's just a good song. It's just a nice, pretty song that they play at a good moment. And I respect that.
Darling, so there you are, with that look on your face.
And if I said this soundtrack was better than 7, what if? Where am I going? So, you play a Squall, a student at a fancy military academy school thing called the Garden, and begin just as he's about to take his bar exam or something. You deal with Cypher, your evil school rival guy, and then you go on your first mission and you pass, and Cypher fails. Then you go to a very nice party and dance with a very nice girl, and your teacher says a couple of very weird things to you. Why is she into us? That's weird. Whatever. I'm keeping an open mind. Ugh. You're then sent out on your first job in Timber to carry out a ridiculous train heist that is functionally impossible but works somehow anyway, and you fight a body double of the dictator/president you were trying to kidnap off the train, and then realize the freedom fighters who hired you are total amateurs and fell for false information. During the train heist is when you officially meet Rinoa, the main love interest whom you danced with at the party. During the first mission is also when you start having your first Laguna flashbacks, in which you play as a different character from about 17 years ago, and these flashbacks will continue to crop up with inconsistent frequency throughout the rest of the game, and we will talk about them in greater detail later, but this is where they start. So, shortly after failing the train heist, the president of Galbadia, the guy you were trying and failing to kidnap earlier, gets attacked by Cypher on live television, and then you flee the city with Rinoa and the rest of your team. Cypher allegedly gets taken to court even though you saw him walk off with the sorceress at the end of that sequence, and it's still really unclear why he even attacked the president. I still don't know. He was just really angry, I guess. Then you flee to Delling City, and you get hired to assassinate the brand new Galbadian ambassador, the sorceress Adia, during a parade, and things go pretty far south. Adia kills the president, and then everyone starts cheering. They never explain why no one reacts to Adia killing the president. The only criticism, and I mean the only criticism I really truly have of the parade sequence / assassination sequence of Disc 1 in this game is the submenu hell, which I mentioned earlier, but other than that, I would say it's a genuinely phenomenal part of the game, and quite possibly the strongest section in the whole thing. The transition between cutscenes and gameplay is really cool and frequent, so you're not stuck in an unskippable 5-minute cutscene and then a bunch of dreary gameplay. There's much more back and forth, which does help in building a sense of tension and urgency. And it still manages to make it clear when you're in cutscene and when you're not, so you always know when you're supposed to be doing something. The frantic tension from the opera circus music and the decadent parade combined with this assassination plan going right, in huge quotation marks, by the skin of its teeth is so atmospherically strong, and the stakes feel so clear that it is just a fundamentally fun and enjoyable part of this game with very strong visual and music direction. So after the failed assassination attempt, you get arrested and a bunch of stuff happens there, and then you find out that there's like a time witch who's been like inhabiting different women's bodies throughout time and like jumping from host to host, and at some point Rinoa gets possessed and it's a whole thing. This was my attempt at a story summary, but it's gonna be kind of hard, and we might have to kind of go by the seat of our pants on this a little bit, because in true Final Fantasy fashion, the story starts with an interesting and clear premise and quickly becomes wildly complicated to the point of potentially requiring a corkboard and string. And we haven't even briefly discussed what's going on with Laguna and all of those flashbacks, right? To this story's credit, you could probably sum it up by being like, there's an evil time witch who wants to compress all of time and we have to stop her. Smaller obstacles ensue on the way to that goal. But when I tell you that just like, things just happen in this game. Like things just happen. And there is often not a clear explanation, and they don't seem to relate to other parts of the game. And there's a lot of elements that crop up once and never again. So giving a cohesive story summary on Final Fantasy VIII is like herding cats. The game is split up into 4 discs. Well, I think it was at the time of release, but it still kind of like has breakpoints for each section of the game still, like narratively, so we're still going to use that as a point of reference for the story. And in disc 1 in particular, well, I think the pacing in the middle is a little bit fast. It maintains a sense of clarity and stakes that wanes later on in the story. You know what you're doing and why for the most part. The court thing with Cypher is never really explained, nor why he wants to kill the president, and you see him again at the parade and it looks like he never went to jail or court at all, and then you never talk about it again. But Quistis was like, there was a whole trial and then he died and they killed him, and they don't explain that to you because he's just back. So it's like, did he jailbreak? Did he even show up to court? Who told Quistis that he died, and why did they tell her that? They don't tell you. You don't get to know. Also, like, what do you mean sacrificing himself for us? He didn't do us any favors. He just tried to kidnap the president. And we tried to stop him, but like, why did he do that? Who was he helping? How was that supposed to help anyone? When did he get to court? That, and like I said, the pacing in disc 1 quite in the middle can be really crazy because major socio-political events play out over the course of like one in-game afternoon, and the pacing on it is just so, it borders on surrealism how insane some of the pacing of events are, especially when you're in Timber and you're dealing with the Galbadian army. Like, the military presence here, the Galbadian military presence makes more sense if it's like more spread out, just logistically. Like, if we'd come here and done our failed attempt at kidnapping the president, and then the next day we went to the TV station and they were like, oh, there's an increase in military presence, like they sent a train of soldiers over overnight. The TV broadcast thing happened, and now everyone's up in a frenzy about it. So we hide out at this lady's house and we spend the night, and then the next morning she's like, all right, it's kind of weird, but they're really abruptly pulling out. I think maybe because the president's leaving, they're taking a lot of the military force with them. But it's giving you a window to leave town. That would logistically make a lot more sense than like the military presence increase and then decrease, like during daylight hours, not even 24 hours, like within 12 hours. And everyone in the world had enough time to react to and have an opinion on it that quickly, which I think is strange. Disc 2 is really slow in the middle and then bananas in the last hour. You start strong with the jailbreak sequence post-parade and like the missile sabotage mission, and you get a little bit of a character moment for Selphie, one of your party members, but not very much. We'll talk about that later. And then you just wander around for a while. And then in the last hours, when you get a really, really bad plot twist that's really horrible, that everybody who plays this game already, it's infamous, we already know about it, but we'll get to it later. And then you have a fight in your garden, which can fly now. your school is a mobile battleship now, and you fight another mobile battleship school.
Wildly impractical. This is amazing.
Disc 3 is where you go to space to heal Rinoa because she got Time Witch possessed at the final battle of Disc 3. You were able to go to space because you were sent there by this like isolationist high-tech nation called Estar, and you find out that the big bad evil Time Witch is named Ultimisia, and her goal is to compress all of time for some reason. She doesn't really have a reason. I guess she's just really hellbent on some hardcore alone time. Disc 4 is much shorter than the other 3, and is basically just the final mission at Ultimisia's castle and then the endgame. Honestly, it's pretty strong, but we'll talk about the ending in more depth later on. So the quality and pacing of this game kind of bounces around a lot. The game excels in longer story sequences like the parade or the Battle of the Gardens at the end of Disc 2, but gets confused and messy with the pacing in other sections. It's sort of jarring how well paced some of the more scripted sequences are, compared to the more relaxed or just less plot-heavy parts of the game. So the Laguna flashbacks, you play as him intermittently throughout the whole game, mostly in Disc 1, with lesser frequency as the game goes on. Him and his two friends, Kiros and Ward, are Galbadian soldiers fighting the Estar army 17 years ago when the last time the Time Witch possessed somebody. She started a war, so she's bad news. You play as Laguna, and just seemingly only tangentially related events to the main plot of the game, just sort of what he's doing, what he's up to. And a big part of this is how he knows this girl alone, who is plot important to the like time compression stuff because she can send people's consciousness back in time, and also we know her. She's like Squall's adoptive orphanage sister. We'll get to that later. Her time abilities are important for beating Ultimisia, and you need her help in the end game. We have to do a bunch of Laguna flashbacks, apparently, to know who she is. Laguna is just kind of like freeballing, doing whatever, and then ends up president of Estar, and then you meet him, and you're like, oh, that's Laguna. Alright, peace out, let's go fight Ultimisia. And it's like, this is this guy that you've been having these like dream hallucination episodes as. You and two of your party members frequently get like blasted into dream world, and you live as these other people for a while. And first of all, they're super laissez-faire, don't care about the dream world possession shit that's happening. They like don't care. They pass out randomly, uncontrollably, and like live as another person, and they're like, they wake up and they're like, oh yeah, how's our guy doing? Like they don't care at all. It's so weird. I don't understand why they don't care. The amount of time dedicated to the Laguna flashbacks makes you think that there is going to be some kind of big tie-in to the main story that functionally just doesn't happen. We're gonna get a little bit fourth wall break here, but this is potentially due to just them forgetting about it. There is an interview with the developers in which they mentioned that there was an original plan to have those two storylines tie together, and then they just kind of like lost it, is what they called what happened. So part of that is, frankly, that they just maybe didn't do it. The other thing here, though, is that you don't ever really get any straight up confirmation in the game, although it is heavily implied that Laguna is Squall's father, and that Rain, the woman who you meet in one of his flashbacks, is Squall's mother. It's heavily implied that this is the case, but they do not say it outright to you at any point. But in any of the supplemental material and developer interviews and whatever, they just outright openly refer to Laguna as Squall's father, like all the time. Like it's just like a basic fact of the game, when it is in fact not explicitly stated at any point in the story. On top of the issues in terms of writing, of things not being explained, and the pacing being kind of wonky, there's also tonally some really weird stuff. Squall getting emotional at Rinoa's bedside post-possession and she's comatose, and then immediate instantaneous jump to Laguna sword fighting a dragon with clown music playing. And like I mentioned earlier, the pacing, buck wild sometimes. We mentioned Cypher in the court. He got arrested, to court, executed, not executed, back at the parade. That was like one day, all one like late afternoon to evening, like that you don't. And then there's the events in Timber where the soldiers show up and then leave, and then they leave again, and then like the military is making big moves in like 15-minute time spans, which is crazy. And there's also, when you get to a fishing town in Disc 2 of the game called Fisherman's Horizon, there is a scene where you have literally landed and been on shore for like minutes, possibly single-digit minutes. And they go, we don't want you here, you might bring violence. And you're like, well, okay. And then you walk back the way you came, and then they go, we're being invaded! We're being invaded right now! This is the part where we've been in town for like 3 minutes, and they're like, the soldiers are invading! We've been here like 10 minutes! And we weren't even planning to come here, we got here on accident. The romance between Squall and Rinoa is the true center stage, everything else is just kind of happening around it. Squall himself doesn't really give a rat's ass one way or the other, he just cares about protecting Rinoa and the rest of his friends, which is why some of it gets confusing because of how complicated all the things happening in the background are. You'd figure if the plot was meant to just be a reason to bring the characters together / put them in situations and serve as a backdrop to the romance, it would be a little less confusing and would maybe not involve compressing all of time. Thematically, it's a bit less focused compared to 7. It's hard to say what 8 is really about. The marketing team and the developers say it's about love, but in practice, a lot more than that happens in the game. 7 is very clearly about environmentalism, class disparity, memories, and troubled past on top of the usual Final Fantasy themes of found family and corrupt government / war. 8 is potentially about a lot of things, most of them it never addresses. The whole child soldier industrial complex goes completely unquestioned, and there seems to be some kind of through line on time, the past, and memories, but it never goes anywhere and lacks purposeful framing. You could argue for the theme of living in the present, but you'd have to do all the heavy lifting yourself, as the game doesn't ever really directly go there. It maintains the found family and corrupt government common to the franchise, but it's hard to say the game is really about love, especially when there are other entries in the series that have romances with equal or greater depth. It can also be a bit confusing, because while the romance is the focus, it also isn't a lot of the runtime. For a game meant to center around Squall and Rinoa, it spends a lot of time not doing that, and does make some effort to flesh out the rest of its supporting cast to its credit, especially Zell, Adia, Cid, Alone, Laguna, Kyros, and Selphie. Before Disc 3, there were only a handful of openly romantic scenes between Squall and Rinoa, and Squall is clocked out for like half of them. There's the waltz, there's the Fisherman's Horizon date, and a little dialogue here and there. Prior to Disc 3, Squall also does express a bit more concern for Rinoa's safety than for everyone else, but she's also the least trained and most often in peril, so the concern comes across as generally practical and rational. Everyone else is a trained soldier and not actively a hostage as often as Rinoa is, so it's really easily read as simply being worried because she is objectively the most vulnerable. Post Disc 3, he freaks out a lot more when she's in danger, which I think is pretty clearly meant to be an indicator that he's developed feelings for her. And on the note of discussing the romance, I am sorry to compare it to 7 so much, so I'll also compare it to 15. I would argue that 7 is the game that is structurally and setting-wise the most similar to 8, while 8 is the most similar to 15 in its focus on romance, especially in terms of how the game was marketed. Well, an attempt at that in 15's case. They almost made a story with a very central romance plot, and then halfway through the script exploded, I think, maybe. 8 comes across as a lot more committed to its romance. Luna Freya is a character in name only, while Rinoa is a much more realized person. 15 also tried to do the whole big central love story angle, but in my opinion 8 did it far better. The love story, or whatever you call what that was my least favorite part of 15 by far. To be clear, I liked a lot of the other aspects of 15, I'm just bitter about the lost potential and the trigger-happy game of Mad Libs that they were seemingly playing when assembling the game's story. It's also worth a brief comparison to Final Fantasy X, as there's also a sort of mostly central love story there too. It's interesting that despite 8 being the Final Fantasy quote-unquote about love, 10 is often regarded as the most successful central love story in the franchise. And frankly, I sort of agree with this. The romance between Squall and Rinoa is largely successful, but it's not without its flaws. Squall especially jumps from catching feelings to living and dying for Rinoa, and it feels a little bit like we missed a stage of his affection growing. A few lines in his inner monologue here and there to express a little more favor towards her would bridge that gap a bit more. Rinoa is better, as she's rather clearly into Squall from the very beginning and it only gets stronger, but other Final Fantasy games like 7 or 9 or 13 have a romance as well. It doesn't take as much plot or screen time as 8 or 10, and in fact Final Fantasy XIII's romance doesn't even involve the main character, but it is between two of your party members, and in fact Lightning actively objects to it, and frankly so do I. This is all to say there's a bit of irony in the fact that 8 is marketed and remembered as the Final Fantasy game about love when there's so many other Final Fantasy games with love stories, and arguably better ones as we've just gone over. Except for 13. I'm sorry, I did not like that guy. I didn't like that guy at all. There are a lot of things in Final Fantasy VIII, like Cypher's bizarre court ordeal from Disc 1, that happen throughout. One of the major ones is Squall gets impaled to a massive degree at the end of Disc 1 and wakes up at the beginning of Disc 2 with no wound whatsoever, and they do not explain it. And you can theorize to hell and back why that happened, but it's just genuinely one big question mark. Squall himself even acknowledges that the wound is gone, and he's like, how did that happen? And then never asks that question again. It's never explained. We don't know if someone healed him. We don't know if the wound was fake or if he hallucinated getting stabbed, but we have a cutscene for that and lots of people saw it. There's numerous occasions where things like this happen where they just switch gears super abruptly and do not explain why Cypher is not in court anymore, how he got out or how he got there. And they don't explain why Squall just isn't missing a third of his torso anymore. He just isn't. Moving on. And they are very much not trying to hide it, which is the bizarre part of all of this. Like I said, in the writing, they acknowledge that the wound is gone. Squall goes, that's weird. Such a bizarre thing to do from a writing standpoint, to leave massive questions like this and not explain them and not even connect them to anything else. Unless it was something insane like they already made the cutscene, but then they were like, we don't want him to be injured for the rest of the game for plot reasons, so we're just gonna make it vanish. Actually, I would not put that past them, realistically. There's a lot of scenes where I found myself saying things like, yeah, whatever, this might as well happen. Or something along the lines of, what? Okay, whatever, sure. Because the fuck it, this is happening now energy is so strong in this game. Unexplainable or underexplained things happen and the game moves on so fast it sort of forces you to move on too. Oh! Oh, I hope he's okay. What? What happened? Wasn't it digging away? Where did you guys come from? Why are we at a garage? How'd we get down? This fucking game, man. And for our next segment, a non-exhaustive list of things Final Fantasy VIII never explains. Cypher's court ordeal, the stab wound disappearing, why Irvine does not go to jail like everyone else involved in the assassination attempt, why the sorceress even wants Cypher as a goon in the first place, why are the porcupine dog Moombas working in the prison, how you get out of the prison and get vehicles, why Headmaster Sid claims he has no idea what's in the basement of Balam Garden and it's from when the garden, quote, used to be a bomb shelter, but then later says he built the garden himself with his wife and Norg. What the ramifications of killing Norg are. Why the Galbadian warship thing that you fight in Fisherman's Horizon is hostile if the people inside are the other half of your party. Why Raijin and Fujin are independently doing a hostile takeover of Balam Town. Why Irvine was willing to leave you in jail even though he was the only one who remembered the bad orphan gang amnesia plot twist we'll get to later. Where Headmaster Sid is during literally anything important. Why Squall is put in charge when Quistis outranks him pretty significantly and even ironically ends up handling some of his responsibilities anyway. Why Rinoa specifically is selected to inherit sorcerer's powers and what that even entails. Why Laguna randomly decides to become the president of Estar instead of raising Alone, / why was Alone under such strict protection if there hadn't been a sorceress in 17 years, / why, if she was supposed to be under protection, she was left in an unsupervised jungle full of hostile dinosaurs that the school just had for some reason. Sorry for getting worked up. I didn't even realize how angry I was getting towards the end there. This game occupies the same part of my brain that houses, like, hazy summer memories from when I was a kid, so in a strange way, despite how impassioned I just was, the mountain of unexplained events doesn't bother me nearly as much as it would in another game or another story, and it's worth mentioning because it's a pretty strong bias for me to have. That said, it does still bother me a lot. I think there's quite a few things here that you could come up with an explanation for if you squint and infer and assume a few things or reference extra textual material, remember the corkboard and string, but within the story proper there just isn't any kind of clarity. That's not storytelling. That's implying there's a cool story somewhere in here and then refusing to tell it. In fact, many of these scenes habitually accidentally imply more depth than was ever intentionally meant to be there. How do I know this? You'll see. I have a few words about this game's lead writer's approach. I will say, credit where it's due, the dialogue is pretty solid for the most part, but anytime someone has to, like, insult someone else, they always say the goofiest things in the world. You're on my oh no, not the tough nut to crack list. That pathetic married couple, because that's a thing someone would say. There are also some really random ass scenes that I think could have been modified a bit. I get that a bit of quirkiness is true to brand for Final Fantasy, but in particular, the band practice scene and whatnot, and the lead up to Squall and Rinoa's date, being that the rest of the party, despite none of them being able to play an instrument, they say so, and then they suddenly can, and Selphie's whole being sad about the stage being ruined from inside the garden when it started flying, so we'll do another band thing, was out of place considering that we just defended an innocent town from Galbadian invasion, and that's what she cared about. I think it should have been the people of Fisherman's Horizon playing the music and celebrating, avoiding an invasion, and we just attend. It makes a lot more sense and gives more life to the spirit and culture of the town, and just logically tracks better than Zell can play sax now. Piano. What? A grand piano? I also get very frustrated by how the other characters habitually give Squall so much shit about his leadership that he was saddled with against his will, mind you. And he's doing the right thing. He will be doing something completely irrational and they will just start tearing into him. They're hypocritical. They change their minds every other scene. They frequently stand around and do nothing to help their situation, then go, Squall, do something. Alright, girl, what's he supposed to do? Lie? Alright. Squall, do something. Alright, alright. Damn. He just hit every fucking button. King, I love him. Dude. There's a classroom of like literal 10-year-olds that we're also worried about dying. And he's the leader. He can't just drop everything and run off. That would make him a bad leader. He needs to think about what everything else is happening before he makes decisions like that. He's doing the right thing. Oh my god. Everybody has something to say. When I don't prioritize Rinoa, like 4 people take turns calling me heartless. But when I do prioritize Rinoa, mind you, in a not an active combat situation, we are in between battles, we are in rest. When I do prioritize her, it's like, oh, you're a leader, you have other things to worry about. Pick a battle. Pick something to be mad at me about, because we're like under siege and they're like, I can't believe you're not thinking about Rinoa. And then we're in times of peace and we are thinking about Rinoa and they're like, you don't have time for this. God. So that god-awful plot twist I was name dropped 3 times before this, we're finally here. We finally get to talk about it. At the end of Disc 2, one of your party members, Irvine, while you're at a basketball court in the recently bombed Trebia garden, turns around and is like, I have a story, and then drops on everyone after some, admittedly a little bit of mutual discussion, that apparently everyone in your party except for Rinoa are actually all orphans from the same orphanage and they all forgot. There is no setup for this. There is no hinting. There is no anything leading up to this. They just drop it, curveball left field, let's go, like, no worries. And this conversation deadass starts by Irvine just going like, guys, guess what? And apparently, their theory that they come up with amongst themselves that is not ever really truly confirmed within the plot, nor is it resolved, is that junctioning a Guardian Force, or our GFs, as we lovingly call them, occupies the part of your brain that holds memories, and junctioning a GF for extended periods of time is the thing that causes memory loss. We have no real evidence for this that is not purely circumstantial, and we never confirm whether this is true, but they drop an amnesia plot twist on you and then blame the GFs and then dip and don't really elaborate on it further than that. Also, side note, Irvine categorically does not act like he knows a damn thing before this. He's the only one that remembers, allegedly, but like I said, he was gonna leave us in jail. Dude, you just killed him. And leave with Rinoa, and now he's harping on about family and staying together. The other part of this plot twist is that the sorceress Adia is also your orphanage matron from when you were a child. You find out that you had an orphanage matron in the first place during this scene. So the matron is the sorceress being the revelation doesn't work, because the fact that we had a matron is also a revelation. They promptly forget about all of this too. It comes up like one more time and then virtually never again, and then at a certain point they stop talking about the fact that they were like siblings sort of for a period of time. It's a very bad plot twist. Yeah, I cannot explaining it to you does not do it justice. It is a very bad plot twist. There's no setup. There's no payoff. It doesn't functionally change anything about the story. It just makes it worse. It doesn't affect your status quo. It doesn't change the decisions you make going forward. It doesn't do anything. We were gonna fight the sorceress anyway. We were gonna do all of this anyway. The fact that she's our orphanage matron just means that we talk to her a little bit more after we defeat her, but like, it's a ridiculously bad plot twist. I can't stress this enough, because it's also just like a bizarre conversation. And also, Rinoa just has to stand there through the whole thing. She has to watch these 5 idiots be like, oh my god, we all came from the same orphanage and forgot. And Cypher too. Oh my god, Cypher was also at the orphanage. That's important. Cypher's part of the orphanage gang. She's part of our orphanage gang. And Rinoa just has to stand there and be like, damn, that's crazy. Because she's not part of the orphanage gang. And she's just watching all of this unfold. And it's just kind of like, well... So, I'm going to distinguish between the end game and the ending. The end game being Ultimisia's castle and the cutscene of Squall and Rinoa finding each other in compressed time is very successful in my opinion. The soundtrack and setting, forging through numerous bosses in a baroque castle, home to a sci-fi sorceress. I do find the section that takes place in Ultimisia's castle where you have to undo the seals to be far too long, even if it is atmospherically strong and has some cool ideas. It drags on for a hot minute, and I think we could have done with maybe sealing half of what we sealed. I don't know why we had to seal our ability to save That kind of pissed me off a little, I'm gonna be real with you. I was kind of upset that you sealed away my ability to save my game. Thanks. I do not like that the final battle selects 3 of your party members at random. That was annoying. The ending narratively it's fine. Everyone kind of just goes back to their normal life and keeps working at the garden with still basically no acknowledgement of the fact that Sid and Adia were snatching at orphans and troubled kids for the last 15 plus years and funneling them from orphanage to military academy to an early grave. The ending is something of a complete return to status quo with minimal change to the world proper, except Cypher likes to go fishing now. The only real difference is Squall and Rinoa are dating now and everyone is a bit closer as friends while still not really talking about the orphanage thing. It's a bit underwhelming in my opinion that the journey to fight an all-powerful time sorceress who has partially possessed one of your party members resolves with minimal consequences. I don't think anyone dies in this game at all, except maybe the president of Delling City. There's the dead seeds you encounter in compressed time, but I'd say it's debatable how much unnamed NPCs in an alternate reality count as legitimate character death in a narrative sense. It does succeed in achieving a lighter tone because of this, and it is plausibly in service of the maybe intentional theme of living in the present that we gently suggested earlier in this video, that we return to such a status quo, but that leaves us with the issue that functionally it's not a terribly satisfying or interesting ending even if it was intentional. I don't hate this ending, but it can be it can make you emotionally feel like nothing happened at all, when the end state is so similar to the beginning with minor changes. While plenty of events did transpire, the lack of change in the setting and characters, except for Squall and Rinoa, can make those events feel meaningless in retrospect, and with a game this long, I don't think it's a good idea to make your audience feel as though they have been wasting time. At the same time, I quite like the last cinematic cutscene, and the bond it demonstrates between the party. A bond I wish we got more of in the game proper, and this is one of the most direct examples of what I said before when I mean some of these cutscenes display a level of bond and personality between these characters that we just don't see in the actual game that I find genuinely quite compelling, but it's just locked in this cutscene that plays during the credits. It is a good cutscene. It makes me smile. I like it a lot, and everyone's hair is still very shiny. I would strongly prefer, however, if it played either before the credits or was more organically integrated with them. It's really small, and it's the final cutscene being like in the corner while credits scroll regular style. I just like because it goes like credits with a little square where the cutscene plays, and then just credits, no cutscene, and then the rest of the final cutscene. And it keeps tricking you into thinking it's over and there's not anything more. And so the flow is not that good, in my opinion. I wish they would have just played it all as one big cutscene and then the credits. Alright, so this next section is just gonna be going over a few tidbits from a handful of developer interviews that I could find translated that I found interesting and or relevant to some of the criticisms I make in this video. So first and foremost, they talk a fair bit about what the previous connection between Squall and Laguna was like. While Alone's role in the story feels clear, the level of focus on Laguna never quite feels justified, especially considering that his connection to Squall's left vague, when I think it definitely shouldn't have been. Whatever plan they had for the big meeting was seemingly scrapped, too, because the moment you meet Laguna is overwhelmingly casual. It seems like not only there was a previously planned better intertwining of these stories, but Laguna also initially was a bigger part of the story and was just as much of a main character as Squall was, which honestly makes the fact that he's in Dissidia make a lot more sense. That was always weird to me. But he may have felt like a more important character to the creators if that was the case early on in development. The game's director mentions in an interview during game development that the way the two characters come together and meet is key and very important. And then in an interview shortly after the release of the game, he talks about what we mentioned earlier, where he says the idea of how that their stories would tie together got dropped and forgotten entirely somewhere along the way. And then in a 2019 interview, in tandem with the release of the remaster, he says he honestly can't remember what they cut. And in the end, he ended up being a much, much smaller character than he was initially planned on being. He also says that the dance party and the parade are the quote-unquote highlights, which is interesting because they're both in Disc 1, which perhaps betrays a front-heavy focusing of the effort. Alongside this, we have Kazushige Nojima, the lead scenario writer, saying this, just listen, I need you to listen to this whole thing. He says, "One challenge for me with writing the story was that I would sometimes write scenes rather casually, but the test players would really get into it and read into things I never intended. They gave me their feedback about once a week, and I'd hear things like, 'Oh, what was going on there?' And I can't wait to see how that mystery unfolds," and I'm just like, I hadn't thought about it that deeply. I mean, part of the fun of being a writer is seeing other people's responses to your work that you didn't predict, but sometimes I'd write things that threatened to elicit these huge misunderstandings, and I'd wish I hadn't written anything in the first place. This is a lot to unpack. It explains a lot that he didn't necessarily mean for a lot of the stuff that ended up in there to have the implications that it did. An example of this in real time is how in the interview they gave during production, they say that Squall's scar is quite important and he doesn't have it at the beginning, it happens in the game. In Final Fantasy VIII proper, it happens in the beginning. It happens in the opening cutscene during a training match with Cypher gone too far. It's not really plot important, it does demonstrate the level of perhaps over-the-top rivalry the two have with each other. Aside from that, it arguably doesn't even happen during the game, as it's in the opening cutscene, and it doesn't really come up very often during the game proper, nor does it really have any kind of ramifications on really anything. There was also an answer in here that I found interesting where their chief graphic designer was talking about how Final Fantasy VIII has more map screens than Final Fantasy VII, and it's partly because of just like camera work stuff with their new approach to 3D, but also that they got very ambitious during development and would just be like, oh, let's add this, oh, let's add that, and they just kept adding stuff until, in their own words, it got out of control. It's worth mentioning too that Final Fantasy VIII's section in Ultimania Archive is way thinner than 7 or 9's, the other games included in the same volume, and this may or may not be indicative of the way they just kind of had this by the seat of their pants approach to production and just added whatever when they felt like it. There's some noticeable absences in some of the sections as well, like certain characters don't even have concept art. From the sounds of some of these interviews, it gives off the impression that a lot of the team was just freestyling and adding stuff, which did result in several cool things, but also means there's a lot of disjointed parts and borderline incoherent messaging. This do-whatever approach to a development pipeline likely led to a lot of the game's issues with a lack of focus and clarity. I've mentioned this intermittently already, but I love Squall so bad it's not even funny. Like, that's my guy. It's true that he follows the same archetype as Cloud as a character, but they are different enough that I can get around that pretty easily. Noctis from Final Fantasy XV is guilty of the same thing, so we can't really single Squall out here. I really like Noctis too, though. Side note, but whoever was naming those guys was like cooking. Squall benefits from having an intermittent inner monologue that the player can see, which is very helpful for a character who is not very vocal or exaggerated in a game with no facial animations outside of cutscenes. I'm quite fond of Rinoa also, for the most part. She's really charming, but there are one or two scenes that make me say like, what the hell, girl? What the hell? What the hell, girl? What the hell? We're following your orders. Why are you making fun of us? I find her a good foil to Squall. I like their dynamic, but I don't find her as compelling as Squall, as I just don't think she has as interesting of an arc in terms of execution. Hers being about growing up a bit and his being more about letting other people in. I think the way that his is executed is a bit more emotionally investing, while hers is a little bit more in the background. I guess another character that is relatively important and comes up frequently in the game is Cypher. Still not sure what his fucking problem was. I get that he's sort of got like a hero thing happening and he's obsessed with fictional heroes and spirals, but the concept of like he kidnapped the president because he was upset that Seed sent you on a suicide mission, the logic doesn't quite track for me. He like made it worse because he was upset that we got sent on an unfair mission. The sort of obsession he has with fictional heroes and being a knight is actually quite interesting, I think, but it's not elaborated on in a lot of depth in the game proper, and I wish we'd gotten a little bit more, because what they do have there and what they do put forward for his character, I think, is genuinely very interesting. Laguna and his squad, their presence in the game was cut down to an extent that I routinely forget about them. Like, they genuinely don't strike me as a very important part of the story, but obviously they were at some point, right? Because half of the end cutscene is dedicated to them. I'm going to compare it to 7 once again and mention that it does not have the same strength in characters the way 7 does. Every character in 7 is pretty solid at least, and in 8 it's hit or miss. It's a fundamentally different story in the way that it has a much greater emphasis on the dynamic between two characters than a wider party, so it makes sense that the two leads are noticeably more complex and interesting people than the rest of the party, because they get way more time devoted to them, and that was intentional. At the same time, the rest of the party sure could have used a little love. Zell especially is like actually quite charming at times. He's the token idiot boy, but he's surprisingly composed and practical during the first mission, which isn't what you'd expect, and it makes him feel a little bit more like a real guy who's somewhat serious about his job than a caricature. Selphie, to an extent as well, despite being introduced even earlier than Rinoa, just manages to kind of be there. Irvine, the sniper who used a double-barrel shotgun, is a little more interesting with his sort of coward streak they establish early on and his very distinct design, but just at first. He's kind of just there, just like Selphie after a while. Quistis and Irvine suffer the most from being left by the wayside a little, in the sense that they feel a little more along for the ride than important to the story, the way other party members do. And even then, Zell and Selphie only get little moments of character here and there. It's still pretty sparse. Selphie gets a moment to lead the missile sabotage mission about halfway through the game and visit Trebia, her home garden. Irvine gets ignored pretty frequently, but every time he does come up again, it's because he's making hard eyes at Selphie or reminding everybody about the orphanage, which he only does like twice. Squall and Rinoa are obviously the most important, but the party still does have things to do in the story and motivations, and they feel sort of involved. The issue is, despite the things they are given to do, none of them are very interesting characters. Of the 4, Quistis is the only one I found remotely interesting as a person, and she gets the least to do out of anyone. Selphie has a bit more to do than Zell, but Zell has more of a developed personality than Selphie. Quistis, like I said, gets mega sidelined in the middle of the game, and she doesn't get to do anything at all, really. And Irvine has some pretty inconsistent characterization, like leaving us in jail despite remembering the orphan gang. Plus, you could probably replace him with a cardboard cutout that sometimes spouts a line about liking Selphie after disc 2 and no one would notice. I also want to have a slightly more arbitrary but still fun section here to talk about the character design / fashion, because this is a Final Fantasy game. In terms of character design, I think they nailed Squall and Rinoa. It's pretty obvious they were the focus, and that makes sense. Quistis' design, as I mentioned earlier, I also find to be very good. Irvine, Quistis, and Selphie all share a very similar color palette, which gives them a nice cohesion. Together with Squall and Rinoa, they all look like they're from the same world, while still allowing Squall and Rinoa to stand out a bit by giving them a slightly more cool-toned color palette. There is the slight problem, however, of the fact that these guys look kind of like they belong to the same world and are relatively normal looking as far as Final Fantasy characters go, while certain other characters kind of fall short of the same design quality while also looking way more insane than them. Zell and Kyros come to mind as the most out of place. When it comes to the witch and sorceress designs, I keep going back and forth on them. I really like Ultimisia's design. I'm lukewarm on Adele's. Adia, her design is so awesome, and then she has like a snail headdress that I just like cannot fathom. And I think a worthy caveat here also is Estar, the entire nation, location, people, all of it, being so different looking from the rest of the game is something I'm willing to give a pass, because they are technically an isolationist nation, so it makes sense that whatever culture and visual identity they've developed amongst themselves would be isolated from the rest of this world. That works. The fact that Zell looks like that doesn't, I'm sorry. Shout out to him. I'm sorry. It's the jacket. It's not even the jorts, it's the jacket.
I just cannot decide on the jorts, man. Like,
I freak with the jorts in kind of a 90s way, but I do not freak with that jacket. Just the silhouette of the jacket. Because it distracts from the statement silhouette of the jort. Do you get what I mean? In conclusion, this game is weird and insane in both its gameplay mechanics and its story. And you know what? I like it anyway. I can't deny a lot of the flaws the game has, and it's always suffered from being compared to 7, but it's one of those games that I think just kind of works anyway somehow. I know it may be hard to believe given the hour I just spent complaining about it, but Final Fantasy VIII is genuinely one of my favorite games ever. It's a deeply charming game, something of a flawed masterpiece. I have so much to say about it, obviously, and plenty of criticism, and yet I still find myself loving it despite all the parts I genuinely think should have been done different. It has a lot of character and personality, and I'm aware that that's a super vague thing to say, but I mean it. Like I said, it has this adventurous, summery, nostalgic charm to me, and it has so much heart that even if it doesn't make sense some of the time, that I just can't help but like it. If I were to try and be extremely objective about this, I might give it a much lower score, whatever that's worth. I'm not really big on out of 10 scores anyway, but for the sake of brevity and clarity, right? If I was trying to be extremely objective, I might give it something lower than a 7 out of 10. But I just love something about this game so much that I just can't help it. There's something just kind of really special about Final Fantasy VIII that I can't put my finger on even after talking your ear off. What, you had him in solitary confinement? He breached containment? What? That can't be good for you. Why did he drive from inside the building? What is this, fucking Napoleon? You're the one bothered. Ooh, wait, zipper on the pants? Is he wearing tearaway pants, do you think? God, I hope so. It's kind of crazy that he's talking shit on us when I defeated him by failing the gunblade prompt 9 times in a row. And he's calling me pathetic? Bitch, you lost to a loser. Me. What is that? Wait, go back. What the fuck was that? Alright, you don't fuck with the porcupine dog on my watch. I won, for your information, and then I lost in the cutscene. That's different. Whoa! I don't remember that trick. Wait outside. We're in a labyrinth alien spaceship. You should just find the door. Bye. I guess you know your way out. Good thing they put the texture on the bottom because I cannot read this. What? Oh, why wouldn't you tell me that at the beginning? So says Mr. Stewart. We just ran like through, like, I think a landmine went off on the way here, and now we're doing this? What? Oh my fucking god. Oh my god. Oh my god. She was just everything, right? She was the sorceress, she was the matron of the orphanage, she was captain of the ship, she was the headmaster's wife. She had 9 fucking jobs. Oh, we built the garden, and also we built this boat, and also we built this orphanage. God, just... Why are there so many things? Master Norg. God, why the fuck did they name him that? Did Rinoa die? Yeah, thanks for making it worse, dog. Attitude? Spirit? Again. I don't know. Now I'm thinking about it, because like one guy complained. He was like, I hate your fucking microphone. Which like... I mean, not much to be done about that, I fear. This is not a high budget production. It's me and my shitty mic against the world. Oh. I love gaming. I remember this part. I remember the sniper part. I don't remember it being on a clown carousel clock that pops out of the roof of the president's house. Well, I'm off. Porcupine dog, yeah, come with me! Come with me! Come with me! Come with me! Wait, he's not in my party? No, porcupine dog, no! These are incredibly level-headed, well-tempered people, Jesus. We're like, we can like cross over because we literally rammed into their infrastructure and they're like, enjoy your stay. My pizza is here. You boys hold tight. Hold on, I got one hand of meat in my pizza. Oh, fuck. These are like American women. I can't get over how American this game is. Like, we're in, like, Colorado right now.
With the rocks.